Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Blue Denim Press's discussion with Linda Hutsell-Manning on her memoir, Fearless and Determined, 2 years spent in a one-room school in the 1960s in Ontario. Let me introduce you to Linda. Linda Hutsell-Manning has 11 published children's books of poetry and short fiction in literary magazines and a novel, an adult novel, That Summer in Franklin. She has taught community college creative writing and given countless school and library workshops across Canada. Her two-act comedy, A Certain Singing Teacher, premiered in 2017. For more details, visit her website at www.lindahutsellmanning.ca. And now with that, I'll turn you over to Linda. So Linda, it's over to you.
Thank you. It's just wonderful to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the interview and reading to you. I'm going to start by reading from the interview, which was my very unorthodox introduction to the school board that hired me for this job. The interview. On a hot day in July 1963, I sit nervously on a straight back chair in a narrow, airless foyer of the Cold Springs Hall. I'm waiting to be interviewed for a Hamilton Township teaching position in a one-room school between Cobourg and Port Hope. For those of you not familiar with the area, these are two small towns on Lake Ontario, east of Toronto. When I hear my name called, I stand determined to be calm. The not too spacious boardroom is in dark paneled wood, a long table down its center. Seated round, looking weathered, some still in their barn clothes, are the Hamilton Township board members. Mrs. Manning, a man at the end table asks, a bit gruffly it seems to me. Sit down, someone else adds. I sit in the end chair, acutely aware of 6 or is it 7 sets of middle-aged male eyes scrutinizing me. I see you graduated from Toronto Teachers College in 1961, the man at the end begins. Yes, I manage before my throat constricts. I know what the next question will be. And you didn't teach for the next 2 years, as you went with your husband, James Manning, to northern Quebec, another man adds. I nod, feeling my face reddening. The town schools where I applied to teach did not take kindly to this information. Rather, they seemed to hold it against me as some deficiency in my moral character. Would that be Russell Manning's son? Someone else pipes up. I nod again. And what would this husband of yours be doing in the wilds of northern Quebec? A board member near the end of the table asks. I can't help wondering what this has to do with my teaching ability, but I dutifully reply. He was installing computers in military bases on the Pine Tree defense line. They seem impressed by this, nodding and making notes. I'm beginning to feel a little like Alice, and I know I've not fallen down a rabbit hole. Do you have any experience in a one-room school? Not directly, I reply, but I did attend Baltimore Public School from grade 6 to 8, and I was in the senior room of the 2-room school there. Miss Hogg, a man opposite me barks out, slapping his knee. Now there was a crackerjack of a teacher. She taught in this very school, the man beside him adds. She did that, another replies. 1957, I think it was. More note scribbling. At this point, I want the interview to end. I can't see what this has to do with my suitability as a teacher for this school. There's a momentary lull, and I consider for a second or two jumping up and bolting. Am I so unsuitable that they're asking random general questions? Nothing about how I would handle a given discipline situation or what approach I would take to a particular subject. Mrs. Manning, the man closest to me is staring, tapping his index finger on the table. Didn't you tap dance at the Baltimore Community Center? I nod, feeling my throat tighten again. This is beyond ridiculous. A long time ago, I managed to say, the Judy Welch School of Dance. You were real good, he adds. More scribbling. I wait, feeling sweat running down my back inside my girdle and I'm sure staining under my arms. The man at the end of the table stands up. That'll be all, he says. Thank you, Mrs. Manning. By the time I'm in the car and on the highway, Tears blur my vision. I blink furiously and pound the steering wheel. I don't want to teach anyway. I'll find something else, another job. Who needs teaching? A week later, a letter from the Hamilton Township Board arrives saying I have the job. Duties of the first school year are to begin September 3rd, 1963, and end June 26, 1964. Remuneration is $3,000 a year, with an extra $300 because I will be both teacher and principal of this one-room school. Although this amount seems ridiculously low by today's standards, it was double the average Canadian wage. After my initial euphoria subsides, I'm going to be a teacher with my own class, all 8 grades of them. I refuse to be intimidated. I'll figure it out. How to teach 8 grades at the same time, how to prepare and organize lessons for umpteen courses, starting with a lesson plan or plans. It has to be doable, even in the 8 summer weeks remaining. Thank you.
All right. I don't think they conduct interviews like that anymore.
No.
And if they do, they would have some serious issues with human rights and all that other stuff.
No kidding.
Well, thank you for that reading to get us started off. I have some questions for you, Linda.
Okay.
These were questions that have been bubbling in my mind over the last year and a bit when I got into this project with you. So you've written juvenile and adult fiction for many, many years, and then you turn around and write a memoir. Why?
Well, it faded right into the background after I finished the teaching, and I had no idea at that point that I would be a writer. I would have probably laughed if someone had said I would be a writer. I was fully intending to carry on teaching. We ended up living in Guelph, and there's a university there. And so I started taking courses with the idea that I would get my degree and then I would go back teaching. And 2 of my Canadian literature was a big thing in the 1970s. It was right in its bloom. And I started taking all these English courses, Canadian lit courses, and ended up in a course called Specialized Honors English, where all you took were English courses. And it was a bit of hard work because I had 3 young children, but I just absolutely loved it. And by the time I graduated, 2 of my professors had started telling me I should seriously consider being a writer because I had all this talent. And I'm not exactly sure how they knew this. It was from my writing essays, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, so when I graduated, instead of being sensible and getting a teaching job, I decided that I would give myself 5 years and see if I could get a book published. And I did slowly get things published. We moved back to Coburg, and it took quite a while, but I did start to get things published. And I started writing adult short stories and getting them rejected over and over again. And then I came up with this idea for a children's book, and I wrote that, and I was able to get that published. And then I went on getting more children's books published, because once you get on a good thing, you think you'll just continue, and that will be perfect. At the same time, I kept writing more short stories, adult, and sending them out and getting them rejected. And then I did, at a later point, write my adult novel. And all during this period, so this is like a 25-year period, there was one particular student that I would see periodically, one of my former students. And once I started getting books published, she would constantly say to me, every time she saw me, the first thing she'd say, "When are you going to write about the one-room school?" And I'd say, "Well, yeah, maybe, later, maybe not now. I'm doing other things, and I'm not interested in doing that." And it was after my adult novel came out, and I wrote a sequel to it, and it was rejected by the publisher that published the first one. And I was kind of devastated by that. And so I started seriously thinking about writing this memoir, and that's how it all got started.
Good. Quite a journey. I mean, a lot of writers take those journeys.
Yeah, they do. They do.
But let me ask you though, why were these 2 particular years that you spent at the one-room schoolhouse so important in your life? You've had many things, I'm sure, in your life, but these 2 years were obviously important enough to shape your character or whatever that made you want to write about it.
Well, the thing was, when I was teaching, it didn't seem that important because it seemed important to survive. I was working so hard and looking after these children and carrying on, but I didn't think of it being an important part of my life. And it wasn't until I started writing the memoir, working on research, and I had a scrapbook where we cataloged the first year. It was like a homemade yearbook. And there was a lot of information in there with pictures, and I'd saved this, thank goodness. And then I was able to get in touch with 1 or 2 of my former students through Facebook, and those students got me in touch with a lot of other students. And so I was able in the end to interview, I think it was 20 of my students. And those 2 things allowed me to write the memoir. And as I wrote it, I started to realize what I had accomplished. Because it was just a part of my life that I just finished it and went on with other things. And so it was after the fact that I realized it was important. And I realized my creativity was coming out when I was teaching. And at the time when I was teaching, I was not aware of this, but I think it was indicative of my character, the way I went about teaching and the way I went about. I've done the same thing with my writing, sort of jumped fearlessly in and pushed ahead no matter what. But I certainly was not aware of it at the time. So it was definitely a thing that happened after the fact.
Good. Now, they say that memory is faulty at best. I know certainly mine is. We remember certain events well, others somewhat sketchily, and yet others we don't remember at all. How did you, when you were writing all these various chapters that are so well detailed, how did you bring balance to all these events from what you remembered to what you didn't remember?
I used the yearbook. I used quite a few things that my students told me that I didn't know anything about. I was never outside, so I knew nothing of what went on at recess. I was always marking books, and or noon hour, or before school or after school. There was no supervision. They supervised themselves because it was a family group. There were 10 families and 32 children. So the older students sort of kept things in line, and that's just the way it was. And I made a lot of it up. I'm a fiction writer. I'm good at that. So certainly the dialogue I made up. But once I got writing it, I mean, I remembered as I went through this yearbook, because each one of the students, I'd given obviously a set of questions they had to answer. And then I would, and their picture was there, and I remembered them all. And I could imagine what they were like. Certain of them were very shy and withdrawn, and others were very outgoing, and some of them were a bit too boisterous. And so I just sort of created them as characters, and then you insisted that I have release forms for all of them. And so they all gave me their release forms, and I had nobody complain or say, you know, I never said that. Several of them said it was amazing that I could remember what they said. But anyway, so it was part fiction and part memoir, and I do say that in the beginning. But certainly everything I've read about writing memoir, I mean, memory is faulty. You know, you don't remember, you remember certain things. And like in a family, if a very significant incident, and then later on, 20 years later, ask the siblings, and they'll all say it was completely different. So it's your own personal take on what happened. So that's how I did it.
Great. Great. So now you had 30 plus kids in your school, okay?
I did.
You had another your own child at home to care for, and in your second year in the school, you were pregnant. You must have been exhausted most of the time with these kids all around you. Did it ever occur to you to sort of just lash out when things got out of control and give your students six of the best, even when unwarranted?
Um, I have to honestly say no to that question. I don't remember being exhausted. I remember being the second year when I was pregnant. Of course, I had all the seat work. I still had to put things on a huge amount on the board, but I had everything. I had it all done, so it was much easier the second year. Although I did add 3 or 4 new courses the second year, but and it was like I was living in a luxury hotel because my wonderful mother-in-law and her sister looked after me. I did nothing at home. I my meals were prepared. I didn't have to clean my room or wash my sheets or do anything or even do my own washing. They did everything. And when I got working on the memoir, I kept thinking, I wonder if I thanked them enough, because they just did everything for me. So that, yes, when I got home, I spent time with my son Bruce, and got him to bed, and then I would have to spend my 2 or 3 hours in doing prep. But he was very young, so he went to bed early, thank goodness. And so I don't remember being exhausted. I remember, I'm a AAA type, and a little better now that I'm turned 80. I'm not quite so I don't have quite as much energy as I used to, but I had endless energy in those days, and I could go on very little sleep and just keep going. And so no, I certainly would never, it's not my character. I never would have lashed out at the kids because I was tired. I think, like, I remember in the second year, if I was feeling tired, or they loved me to read out loud to them, and I always was reading a novel to them. And so if, on a certain afternoon, if I was feeling sleepy or tired or whatever, then I just say, I'm going to read to you now. and so I loved reading out loud. And so we would do that, and but I certainly never lashed out at them. Not that I'm aware of. I don't know. We could ask my students, but nobody ever even insinuated that I did that sort of thing. So.
Good. Well, good to know that memory is faulty, right? So
Yeah, well, this is it.
on that one.
Exactly.
Now you said you labeled yourself total in charge, the absolute ruler. I tried to call you a dictator, but you didn't like that word. So anyway, you were somewhat a totalitarian. I mean, for no reason, for no fault of your own. You were the chief cook, cleaner, bottle washer at your school. You were far away from the authorities. You had to turn on a dime and do things yourself. How easy or difficult was it to cross a line or to take unsanctioned shortcuts being in that situation?
I don't remember ever taking shortcuts. I remember always feeling that I wasn't doing enough, and I was always trying to do more. It was every day was different. And I mean, it was the same and it was different, but there were always things that happened and things that came up that I wasn't expecting, and I just had to deal with it. And I guess I was fortunate. My personality, I can roll with the punches. And so I didn't, there were a few things I got upset about. The boys smoking in the shed. The second year when the guy came to interview, to see how I was doing, and he inferred that I was going to have the baby on the desk. I was very upset after. I was not, I didn't let him know I was upset, but the inspector, yes, he was a piece of business. He was. Anyway, but so very few things. Mostly I remembered things that were inspiring and I certainly had wonderful feedback from my students as adults, and like the first open house, I was a nervous wreck, worrying, and I mean, I realized what happens is it's only the parents of the kids that are doing well that come to open house anyway. I remember that from high school, when my kids were in high school, like, if there was one family that were very poor, and certainly their parents never showed up. So the open house was just sort of a back patting, kind of, you're doing a great job kind of thing, which made me feel better. That was in November. That was the first year, and that definitely made me I gave me more confidence. I think I would just jump in where angels fear to tread and just do it. And that kind of an attitude sometimes gets you in trouble. It has gotten me in trouble, but I don't think it got me in trouble with the school. Like the first year, when I decided I was going to audition for Addo-Annie in Oklahoma, and I mean, in those days, that was a fairly risque part, the sort of friendly and promiscuous character that I was playing. And I worried a lot about whether the parents would go or the board members would go, and whether they would chastise me or but I did it anyway because I really wanted to do it. And when I interviewed my students, a few of them did go to the production, and they were just overwhelmed. They said they remembered, how could I remember all the lines, and I sang all these songs, and I looked so lovely, and that's all they remembered. They were too young to get, I guess, and naive to get all the sexual innuendos, and nobody ever said anything bad about it. And then the second year, when I became pregnant, now in a graded school in the 60s, once you started to show, quote, you would have to, a supply teacher would come in, and you would have to not be teaching anymore. So since I was principal and teacher, I just had a discussion with myself and said it was perfectly fine if I stayed teaching. And it was the second year, and I knew the school was going to be closed, and I was going to be the last teacher that was there. And I wanted to just give them the best education I could, and give them, to wherever they were going to go. They all got split up and sent to different schools. And so I guess I worried about it a little bit, but it didn't bother me at all until this wretched inspector came in. But that was in June, so it didn't matter anyway. It was game over almost then. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I take back to some extent the term dictator, because when I read the book, there was a lot of love in that book too. You cared for those kids.
I did. They were like my own children in a way. Like you became this big family, and you worried about the poor ones. And that's why in the second year I started the soup program, because there were, the first year I was not aware as much the first year of the socioeconomic differences. There were the children of the fairly well-off farmers that owned their own property, and then the rest of the kids their parents were laborers who were renting out in the country because they couldn't afford to rent in Coburg, and were doing whatever they could do or not doing anything. And so there was quite a divide there. And I guess on the playground there was a bit of discrimination, but not too much, because everybody was just sort of hanging in together, But anyway, I've lost my train of thought. So carry on. What else do you want to say?
So let's close that one by saying you were a benevolent dictator.
I was a benevolent. If that's not an oxymoron, yes, I was a benevolent dictator.
So now here's another question. Let's get on to another topic. So compared to the 1960s, and let's not compare it to today, because we're in a pandemic and that's an unusual situation anyway. But if you compare it to, say, last year, before the world came to a standstill, compared to last year in the schools, and compared to when you were teaching in the 1960s, what has been lost to students of, say, last year, and what has been gained?
These children were very independent. They all walked, most of them walked to school or rode their bicycles. I don't even know if there were any that were driven to school. You just got to school on your own. That was just the way it was. So they were very independent, and they helped each other a lot. And there were 3 older girls that came and helped me mark books all the time. And during the afternoon, they would often listen to the young ones read or help them with words or spelling or, things like that. So there was a huge amount of cooperation and independence. They were very independent, these children. And I think that children today aren't that independent. I think they're more looked after and hovered over, the sort of helicopter parent thing, which is maybe extreme, but and then social media and has changed everything. I mean, my children, some of them had television sets, but they didn't all, and not very many of them got newspapers. They maybe got the Coburg Daily Star, which mainly had social teas and sports stuff in it. Although Foster Russell did when he was the editor for quite a while of the newspaper. He was when I was in the 60s. There's just been an article about him, and he was a very interesting independent guy. And he did try to bring some real news into the newspaper. But these children really, and most of them hadn't been anywhere. Like, they hadn't been any farther than Coburg and Port Hope. So their worlds were very small, and they were, it was very family oriented, and grandparents and aunts and uncles were in the area. And so a lot of that is lost by today's children. But on the other hand, I was extremely frustrated because I was locked into this curriculum. There were no resource books for me. I brought a bunch of books of my own. I used to go to the library and get books and bring them to the school for a while, because there were only a very few of the children that could get into Coburg or Port Hope and go to a library. A lot of them had never been to a library. So that part was very frustrating to me, because there were times when something would occur and I would think how wonderful it would be if we could sort of take 2 or 3 subjects and put them together and create a project. Like when Kennedy was shot, and the children were so upset about the distance and how far were the bad guys going to come and get them. And we got the map out and talked about the distance. And I thought I could work out a whole thing with that, geography and social events, current events and everything. But of course I couldn't do that. I had to do reading, writing, and arithmetic, and get through the curriculum. So things were lost and things were gained, but we couldn't go back to a one-room school. I don't think it would work at all. And it is difficult for teachers, incredibly difficult for teachers now, with all the kids having cell phones, even quite young children having cell phones. And then once they started integrating all the children, and I can understand why they did it, special needs children are integrated into the system. But that creates a lot more work for the teacher. And I remember, because I did so many school readings, I started in the early 80s, and I remember all of a sudden you go in a staff room and there'd be this big list, all these kids that had allergies and these kids that had problems and how they had to be dealt with, which certainly weren't there when I first started. So things were lost and things were gained. But I only got in, probably was only asked to come into classrooms of teachers who were above average, who were quite exceptional, because they were the ones that would want to be bothered to have an author come in, and the teachers just doing incredible jobs. And it, like, speaking of COVID, I mean, it just must be so difficult now for teachers right at the moment. We can't go back. So things were lost, things were gained.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about your launch, for instance. I came to your launch last year, and you had a full house. I still
That was
remember.
amazing.
We were at the art gallery. The place was full. There were people standing out by the walls. There were people standing out in the corridor. Uh, they were everywhere, right? And then amongst them, what was really interesting for me was that you had at least 20 of your former students from this one-room schoolhouse of the
Yeah,
1960s who
yeah.
were there at the launch, right? So what I was amazed was, how did you manage to maintain a relationship with these people for so long? And how many of the total group you had have stayed in this area, and how many have left? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, I mean, about half of them, at least half of them are still around. And the other half have moved to other places, and one as far as New Zealand. Um, but I didn't keep in touch with them until I started working on the novel and on the memoir. And I first got in touch with the Burnhams because I knew them, and so then they gave me the names of other students that were in the area, and then one student joined me on Facebook, and she gave me the names of more students, and this is how I was able to sort of track them. So it was only once I guess I spent about 2 years, tracking things down and then actually doing the writing. So it was only in the last, there were 2 or 3 people, like the one student who kept bugging me about writing the memoir. But no, I didn't have this constant contact. And the thing was, when we all got back together, I did meet with them the year before the book came out. And I was, I couldn't get past that. I couldn't get them past me being the teacher. They still called me Mrs. Manning, even, and were sort of, deferential to me when they're when they were talking to me, and even at the launch they were like that. I wanted to, sort of get them to loosen up and stop being so formal. But I guess I just will always be the teacher to them, which is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but it was very, very because I really didn't realize that they felt so positively about me and what I had done. I knew that I felt fiercely caring for them the whole time, even the difficult ones. But I guess I just didn't, I was young, I was in my early 20s. I mean, I don't think you philosophize the same way about things as you do later, So it was just the last few years that I really realized what was the bond that we had. And so it's very nice. It's lovely, really. Yeah.
No, I know you did a lot for them. I mean, you organized picnics, you took them on tours to the Thousand Islands, you organized games, sports meet, the Beatles concert, the Christmas concert. There was a whole bunch of things that you didn't really have to do, but you had to make life interesting for them. And I'm sure they benefited from that spurt of creativity that came from you, right? No, that was very nice. Now, getting back to the book itself, you launched this last year, or we launched this last year, and I think you had a phenomenal run, in reading at various events. I've been with you to various events, and you were going very, very fast and strong, and then the pandemic hit,
Wham.
and everything had to stop.
Yes.
But I have to say, hats off to you. You may be 80 years old, but man, you've got energy. You're still going. and you're coming back now, with starting with this event, to try and go back on the road again. Because the nice thing with memoir is that when it's happened, it doesn't go stale, right? Because it's a time capsule of a certain period in history that you have captured. And whether you promote it 2 years from now or 5 years from now, it's always going to be there. So you have a book that you can take on the road with you even 5 years from now. So you have the book, and hopefully with these vaccines that are coming out and a whole bunch of things that are happening, we will get past this pandemic pretty soon. What plans do you have to go promoting this book for the second round?
Yeah, well, 15 canceled readings and I'm back in touch with the libraries and book clubs that wanted me. I have done a virtual reading with one group, and I just just today had a library contact me and say that they'd be interested in a virtual reading. As soon as we can do live readings again, I mean, virtual readings are all great, and I'm incredibly grateful for them. And it's a very interesting, you have to get used to seeing yourself, for one thing. But it's not the same as a real reading when you're there, because you know, maybe some books sell, but you don't really know. It's quite an ephemeral sort of thing. It's not like going to a venue and a library and then you end up selling 10 or 15 books. It's completely different. So I'm going to start working on it. Well, I already am. I contacted all my contacts where I was supposed to have readings. I contacted about this virtual reading tonight. And I will, like, what you do is you take any possible thing that happens, use it as an excuse to get in touch with them again. So anything that I happen to be doing, or anything that comes along that might be pertinent, then I can get in touch with them again. You become a door-to-door salesman. I know when I was teaching creative writing classes, and people would ask me, you know, how do you get yourself going and how do you sell books? And I said, well, you know, you're this cloistered writer writing in this very quiet, solitary place. And then once a book comes out, you become a door-to-door salesman, and you put on your polyester suit and your fedora, and you go, you know, glad handing everybody and trying to sell your books. I mean, it's a very different thing, promoting and writing. Very different. They're polar opposites. And I'm lucky because I enjoy the publicity aspect of it, and I know I have a number of writer friends who do not like doing it at all. It's very difficult for them. So I figure I'm very fortunate that way.
No, I have no questions about your ability to promote yourself as much as you can. You have been doing that. So I'm going to stop asking questions now, because there are some questions gathering on the feed, and I'm going to relay some of them back to you.
Okay.
There's a lot of nice things being said by people on the feed, so I'll let you read those later.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask you some of the questions that I've been gathering so that we don't run out of time.
Okay.
So the first one I got was, wait a second. Did your experience as a teacher influence your writing?
Well, that's a good question. Did it influence my writing? Not directly, I guess. I think my creativity that I discovered as I wrote the memoir, that was inherent in my teaching, certainly then showed up in my writing, but not directly, because after I finished writing, and then when I went to university and became steeped in literature and Canadian literature, then I sort of, you know, my path went in that direction. But dialogue has always been very easy for me, partly because I was in a lot of plays when I was in high school and after high school, and very attracted to theater and being on stage, and read so many plays and was involved with plays. And of course, that's all dialogue. And so dialogue is very easy for me. So that, I suppose that was one of the reasons it was easy for me to put dialogue into my students' mouths, because I was familiar with that. You know, you almost take on the character of the child and how they behave, and then start talking. But I wouldn't directly say, no, I wouldn't directly say it did.
Okay, here's another one. Did you write your memoir chronologically, or did you patch it together as you interviewed your former students?
The first year, I was able to use this scrapbook because it goes month by month, right, from September to June. The second year was episodic, and I picked out the things that I remembered doing. So I had this bare bones of the thing, but then as I interviewed students, I would have to add things. mostly add things because I found out so many extra things. Paul Burnham was Burnham Family Farm. He was the first person I interviewed, and he came to the house and he sat down and he looked at me and he said, I suppose you don't remember the forts we used to, I bet you don't know anything about the forts we used to build. I had no idea they built these incredible forts. I described them and I couldn't see them. They were way over on the edge of the field. And I don't even know, like, if kids were over there, like when I rang the bell, I don't remember seeing kids running from way on the other side of the field to get back into line. And they had to be in line in those days. So I added things in, as I went along. I basically did it chronologically, even the second year, what I could remember. And then it was immeasurably helpful having all these comments by the adult students.
Okay. And then here's another one that's along the same lines. Once you got going writing your memoir, how long did it take? And did you write a certain amount daily when you were not doing your research?
Oh yeah, I'm like, there's different kinds of writers. I sort of, I just go all out with it when I get going and spend long hours working on it. And it took me close to 2 years, I guess, from the time I started actually thinking about doing it. I had a jolt or push at the very beginning, because in our writers group, I mentioned that I was going to start working on this. And then 2 other writers who had published memoirs got in touch with me and asked me if I would come and talk about my memoir and do a reading. And I wrote the first chapter, the interview, in a big hurry, so that I would have something to read at this thing. And I didn't have any concept of how interesting or people would be interested or wouldn't. There were about 35 or 40 people. It was at the Loft in Coburg. And I had so many people come up afterwards and ask me, and there was huge interest in it. So then I thought, okay, now you have to write it. And at that point, I had no outline. I hadn't contacted any students, nothing. Just this introductory, the interview that I read to you, that I remembered because it was seared into my brain because it was such an unusual experience. So 2.5 years, and then we spent it altogether almost a year, didn't we, Shane? So I guess it was a 3-year project. Quite fast, actually, compared to lots of writing I've done where I've spent much longer writing the piece of whatever it was.
Yeah. Okay, I have time for one more question, and I'm going to ask this one. This is very interesting. I thought it was about writing, but it's actually about teaching. What's the one best piece of advice you would give a young person who is considering becoming a teacher today?
That you really want to do it, that you really feel that you can. I think that you want to teach children, because and I know from our own school experiences that there were teachers that were there biding their time, and there were teachers that were wonderful. And the teachers that were wonderful were the ones who really enjoyed teaching, who wanted to teach, and felt that the students were important. And certainly if you teach year after year after year, because I didn't do that, but I do know talking to teachers, it does become more of a challenge. And so you have to have this core feeling of feeling that teaching children is incredibly important. I was quite overwhelmed when these children, the young ones that came, the grade 1s, started to read. It was quite a miracle to have, these children couldn't read at all. And then they learn how to read and they can start reading, and it's quite exciting. So yes, you have to really want to do it and feel that it's your life mission, I think, because otherwise there are a lot of challenges in today's teaching. So you've got to, and I noticed when I went into schools, I have not gone into schools since maybe 2010, I don't think. But there were always new, enthusiastic teachers. And one teacher that I went back to her school in Brighton a number of times, and she'd been teaching for a long time, and she was still completely enthusiastic and really cared for her children. I think you have to care for the children as well. I think that's really important.
Good, Linda. Thank you very much. I'm going to stop asking you all these questions now because you must be exhausted with all these questions. No. But it's been very nice listening to this coming from the heart, right? I mean, you are not, you're a person on a mission, not just writing, but as a teacher as well. And to be a teacher and a writer is a tough job, and it's a great calling. So thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us today. Now I'm going to ask you to read again because we have some more time. Read another section from the book, and I'm going to then compile from the list of questions that I got and the names of people who made comments. I'm just going to pick 3 names at random, and after Linda finishes her reading, I will call out those names, and I would ask that you send us your email, your mailing addresses, either email directly to Linda or to info@bluedenimpress.com, and we'll get out we'll be drawing for 3 books. 3 copies of Fearless and Determined, and we'll get those out to you in the next week or so. So Linda, go ahead and read.
Okay, I'm going to read part of the first Christmas concert chapter because we're close to Christmas. The evening of the Christmas concert, once everyone piles in, wet boots stuck under side desks and coats piled on top, my little school is in a proverbial bursting at the seams state. The fire has been more than amply stoked, and the temperature hovers around 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Fathers loosen ties, and many cheeks are glowing. Parents, mostly mothers and siblings, fill the assembled chairs, many of the adults with legs too long. Fathers and older brothers lean against desks or stand at the back. Grades 1 to 4 sit as tight as sardines on the floor between the front seats and the stage, while grades 5 to 8 perch against desks along either side. As soon as I stand on stage, there's an instant quiet with only a few preschool visitors whispering and chair scraping. I introduce myself, welcome everyone, and the show is on. The program is fairly straightforward and by today's standards, unbelievably simplistic. The energy, however, is the same as with any school performance, each participant wanting to do his or her best, some more confident than others, a few displaying showmanship beyond their years. Stories, choruses, instrumental numbers, the nativity, a turkey draw, Santa, presents, and food. I remember the 10 Little Indians presentation. No teacher would think of having students perform this skit today. It was used widely at the time, and even though the sentiment is neutral, I do find it a bit shocking to think I used it with so little concern. The grade 1 and 2 students involved are so excited to be wearing costumes and proud to recite their numbers 1 to 10 in front of an audience. I suppose today it could be puppy dogs or ducks. If you don't remember or know the sequence, here is the politely incorrect version. 1 little, 2 little, 3 little Indians, 4 little, 5 little, 6 little Indians, 7 little, 8 little, 9 little Indians, 10 little Indian boys. The children stand in a row and sing, shout the numbers they are, ducking down and up as they do so. Once up to 10, the process is reversed back down to 1. Now when I look at it, the last line, 10 little Indian boys, is not only racist, it's also sexist. Neither of these politically charged terms was even heard of in small town vernacular at the time. I have some not so great black and white photos, one of the nativity, one of 10 little Indians, and one of a play called The Zoo. Someone is on his hands and knees and has an oval-shaped piece of cardboard with spikes coming out of it that looks suspiciously like pencils strapped to his back. There's obviously a confrontation going on as some other unidentified creature is close by. Whatever it is and whatever happens, it's greeted ultimately with thunderous applause and cheering. Enthusiasm completely overshadows any lack of sophistication on all levels. One of my students now tells me it must have been her dad who came in as Santa. Whatever his excuse for not attending the concert was reasonable and definitely not to be questioned at the time. She said it was only years later at a family get-together that the secret was revealed. I'm incredibly nervous and distressed when a few things go wrong. The sheet curtains do not pull back and forth easily, and by the last act, the rope holding them is sagging substantially, rendering pulling an increasingly difficult task. Some students forget lines, and the prompter is often too loud, which causes a ripple of laughter through the audience. My cheeks redden, and I wish we'd practiced more. However, each scene proceeds smoothly, and given our limited resources and venue, we do put on a good show. After much jovial conversation, eating, and back-patting, families begin to leave. The little ones are getting cranky at being long past their bedtime. My few faithful senior girls and their mothers stay to help me clean up. We take down the curtains, pack up the Christmas tree ornaments. Many have been already taken by those who brought them. The rest go into a battered cardboard box. Mrs. Carr assures me she will come to clean the floor, now strewn with crumbs and crumpled serviettes, as well as put the desks back in order. I'm so tired I don't protest, even though I know it will be a major job. With the last person gone, I put on my coat and turn off the lights. A moon has risen and light floods in from the large east windows, giving everything in the room a surreal, dramatic appearance. Long shadows stretch from desks, chairs, even the crumpled serviettes. An overall effect is a black and white collage. It's a set, my set, the best I could do. And as adrenaline diminishes, I slump into a chair, letting my head rest against the wall, waiting for my husband, Jim, to return. My first semester is over. I know my students now, the relatively well-off farm kids and poorer families who rent less desirable dwellings in the country. 15 families, 30 kids. I vow to make 1964 even better than the 4 months just past. I have new ideas, new projects to begin, things that will improve this little front row school. Thank you.
Good, thank you. That's a great reading for this particular time of the year. So thank you again, Linda, for reading and for answering the questions very diligently and bravely. I have some winners' names to announce. But before I do that, I just want to mention to everyone that this book is available on Chapters Indigo if you prefer to order online or through Amazon. Or you can order it from your nearby bookstore. We have them available in our local bookstores around here in Northumberland County at Lighthouse Books in Brighton, Let's Talk Books in Coburg, and Furby Books in Port Hope. Hopefully you will support our local authors and our local bookstores by picking up a copy. And for those who would like to read it electronically, the book is available as a Kindle version and as a Kobo EPUB version. The prices have been reduced for the next week to $2.99 US for the Kindle and $2.99 Canadian for the Kobo. So cheaper, as I said, than the proverbial cup of coffee from Starbucks. You get to read Linda's 2 years of her life in the 1960s. So let me announce the winners, and I picked these names at random. So there was nothing engineered here. The names are Marie Shoup, Judith Blakeston, and Michael Diet. So I'll read those names again. Marie Shoup, Judith Blakeston, and Michael Diet. Congratulations, you won yourself a copy, an autographed copy of Linda's book, Fearless and Determined. And if you can send us your mailing addresses, we will be happy to ship those books out to you. So Linda, I think we're coming to the end of the show. If I was sounding a little distracted at the beginning, I hope I got everything right. I didn't even introduce myself, but I think most people know me. I'm Shane Joseph. I'm the publisher at Blue Denim Press. I was pressing all these buttons as we started, and I probably even forgot to press the record button. But I think I did get it going. So I think we have this show recorded in case you got stuck somewhere on the line, or the screen froze on you. We will have this an edited version of this on YouTube shortly, so you can watch the recorded version as well. So Linda, you may want to just say good night, because we're going to be signing off shortly.
So very nice to see everybody. Marie and Judy and anybody else that I know that has come in to listen. I really appreciate it. And it's certainly a whole new thing doing Zoom readings, but I'm starting to get used to it and feel much more comfortable. And thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
And thank you everybody for attending tonight. We will have more of these events, author events, in the coming year. We hope to feature some of our Blue Denim Press authors and even have discussions between them. We will have a session on memoir writing early in the year. We'll have people like Linda and Sharon Crawford and a few others who have written memoirs and published by us. We'll have them in discussion, because there's nothing like learning it from the people who have actually done it. So that's the plan. So stay tuned. Have a safe holiday season. Hopefully everybody is well, and we'll see you all again next year. Good night.